simplify, automate, and accelerate. With Netaxis solutions.
So for those who don't know me, I'm Federico Legge, I'm Product Manager SRE at Netaxis. And Wayne was so kind to join me on stage from Fuse2, who will give you a view on how they are using SRE, Session Routing Engine, in their network. So I'm gonna try and entertain you with our view of a routing engine, what a routing engine should provide to the table, a modern routing engine. And I thought I could start with quite strong sentence, which, not surprising, is not from Wayne nor from myself, but it's from Charles Darwin, which speaks about adaptability and how adaptability is one strong point. Now the animals he was referring to here, we are talking about VoIP equipment. And traditionally, we would look into VoIP type of equipment in a way that we would look for more strong solutions, more feature set, more capacity from those solutions. But sometimes we would miss the point of adaptability, which is key in nowadays equipment, especially when we are talking about routing, the routing layer. So before going into more details, I would say first question we should ask ourselves is, do we even need, as a service provider, do we even need a routing engine? And reason for this is that most service providers, even when they were not running a routing engine, they were mapping routing features on the network or control layer, namely from SBCs or MSCs or SAW switches, which were working well for quite a long time. But they, at some point, they proved themselves to be quite limited. Now, chances are, if you're running a network as a service provider, that you have faced questions from your customers or from internal needs. And I can give you some examples. Those comes from real life requests from customers. So, for instance, customers wanted, well, service provider wanted to apply CLI validation or CLI screening at different levels. So based on different SIP headers, and in a sort of case-by-case scenario. So you get a call, you do screening in some way. For another call, you must do screening in another way. Now that's difficult to map on SBCs and SAW switches. Or another example I can give you is, let's say the concept of backup numbers. So those numbers that would be called whenever a user is not reachable on their business number, right? It's kind of hard to map that into traditional type of equipment when you want to do it in a seamless way, regardless the end user type of access, so Teams or PBXs. So all in all, chances are that, so you might have mapped these features somehow on your equipment, but chances are that at some point you find a limiting point in your network, which would require a more flexible layer, so to speak. And that's one of the things we expect from a modern routing engine. So traditionally, why would we implement one routing engine? Well, it would be to centralize routing decisions. So having a central point where we could enforce routing and policy decisions, that was a must, which also gave, mostly incidentally, the fact that the routing engine was also end-to-end service aware. But that is not enough today. So we see more and more that specific request requires or call for specific flexibility and programmability. So here the key is programmability. We need to make sure, or we need to be able to react to new requests in a timely manner, in a way that will not limit our time to market. So flexibility is good. Sometimes it's not enough. So we really think that programmability is the way to go in the routing layer, let's say. And then that goes arm in arm with the fact that that a routing engine or modern routing engine should be as much data-driven as possible, which means there must be few pre-configured behaviors in the machine, but most of the behavior, most of the routing decision should come from data that are either mapped in the routing logic itself, or sorry, in the routing layer itself, or retrieved from external systems. And that allows you to more easily operate that layer. Also, very important is the fact that typically routing engines would speak, let's say, standard interfaces. I'm thinking about SIP. But the more we go to more future-proof interfaces like HTTP and IoT type of interfaces, the more we need to make sure that this layer is as open as possible, so that we can openly define our APIs and the way this layer works. So as you can imagine, it's not just that one size fits all, but it's rather the opposite. So from experience, we've seen service providers mapping their requirements in terms of routing in a very, very different way, one to another. And not just in terms of selecting the features that you're running on the routing level, but also the flavors. So for instance, we might have different service providers doing CLI validation in very different way, or rerouting backup plans and disaster recovery service in a very different way one another. Let me give an example for CLI validation. So we have implementation where the provider says, whenever I get a call and that call doesn't have a p-asserted identity with a valid number, I would just refuse the call, which is good. It's just a way of doing it. Other providers would say, I don't get a valid CLI, I would just remap it to a pylon number that I know. So those are examples of how providers should keep some sort of flexibility in the way they define their logics. And what's important about programmability and being data-driven is that we want to get rid of the technical overhead that the SBCs and soul switches and other equipment have inherently, I would say. We want to abstract the service and business requirements from that layer. We just want to use data which come from manual provisioning or automatic provisioning or from external system, and use those data to steer our routing and to give our policy rules. So when it comes to data, well, surely a routing and policy layer would work with user data. So you should still expect a modern routing engine to be manually or automatically provisioned somehow with its own database. But data might be taken also from external systems like HSS or CRM or other kind of repositories, right? So those are still the places where we would have data mapped. Plus, we could have different type of systems pushing routing rules or policy rules, namely, for instance, coming from your end users. So from portals or application, we could still have an input in terms of routing rules and policy rules, which is possible. Other examples are anti-fraud systems. So we could, on the routing layer, we should be able more and more to accept that anti-fraud system would push rules directly to the routing layer. But that's not to be seen, or at least not more and more in the future, not to be seen as a one-way type of communication, but the routing and policy layer is in the perfect place also to have an end-to-end understanding of your calls, which means it can also expose data to different type of systems. We had I heard some speeches from this morning which said that the value is shifting from pure voice to data analytics, for instance. And that's particularly important because you want your routing layer to provide data there as well. Let's say valuable information to data analytics or systems that would do business views, or system like even system based on artificial intelligence, which would give you a sort of insight of the trends in your network, how well your network is behaving, and what is there to be corrected or enhanced. And the last step when you're using open interfaces and data is to use this as a feedback mechanism, which means all that you build as views and insights could be reused in those systems that would actually trigger the routing rules. So it's a sort of virtuous circle, so to speak. And so here is where, let's say, our SRE comes into play, because in terms of programmability, it provides an easy to program type of interface. Let's say with a graphical interface with a drag and drop model, let's say, you would be able to program your logic to do exactly what you needed to do, right? So to deal with your voice calls in a way that you wouldn't need, once this work is done, you wouldn't need to, let's say, to modify these logics, or not a lot anyway, but it should work in a data-driven model. So you would operate the system on a daily basis by just pushing the data that you're used to. So those are like numbers and trunks information and so on, without having to configure it into a sort of system with proprietary language. And this data, obviously, as I said, could come from external sources as well. And when it comes to scalability and adaptability, we do provide in SRE different versioning and rollback points, which will allow you to change or make your logic evolve over time without the risk of putting in danger what you're running and what you have. Last but not least, we do support different deployment models, so not just on-prem, but private cloud, public cloud, or hybrid type of solutions. So those are, let's say, the key features. Obviously, the feature list is much wider than that, but those are, let's say, the key features that I wanted to talk about. And those features are mapped in a very, as I said, in a very different ways in different operators. So what I would like to do is that we give a view on how we use SRE in the network of Fuse2, and how this has helped you guys to achieve your requirements.
Yep. So this is, I guess, a high-level overview of the Fuse2 architecture of the SRE and how that interfaces to like different SBCs. We're using SWE cores, we're using SWE lights for Teams. We've got application layer and a customer portal as well. But I think it's important to talk about maybe the challenges that we faced before we engaged with Netaxis. Was we were dealing with an aging SBC hardware-based platform, which was, was based on GEMBAND technology. In their wisdom, they end of life that product, which is, in hindsight, it was a good step for Fuse2, and we recognized we needed to go, into like a virtual infrastructure and be able to have sort of that geo redundancy across our network. And we'd actually outgrown it, the physical sort of capabilities of the hardware SBC. We needed the ability to quickly scale. And there was also a lot of regulatory changes in the UK, CLI surcharge, which we needed to adapt to. And it's very difficult to sort of adapt to those changes on traditional SBCs. They're quite clunky. The APIs were really poor on the I don't know if anyone's used the GEMBAND Q series, but they are not particularly favoured by software developers, to say the least. So, yeah, these are a lot of features we're using on the SRE. But earlier on, when I was hearing Manuel talk about the motto of Netaxis, simplify, automate, and accelerate, I thought that really resonates quite well, actually, with the SRE. And I actually broke it down into the 3 sections of how SRE works with that motto. So we've got the simplify, and just to name just a handful of the things that we're doing with the SRE is quite astonishing, really. So we've got the call admission control. That is really super simple to implement. When we add customers to the SRE, we can limit those users no matter what service they're taking from us. If that's a team service, a hosted VoIP service, or a SIP trunk service, the SRE gives us a power to sort of limit that call admission control, i.e. how many channels or sessions or calls they can make at any one time. The routing functionality is all done by the SRE, where previously we would probably do that on the SBC, and we bring that down into the SRE, and we've got the ability to do a lot more advanced routing to our carriers, routing based on the type of customer that is making the call. If it's like a retail customer, a call center customer, we've got the ability to really drill down on that routing. And also it's got an LCR engine in there as well. So, if you're doing least cost routing for your, to maximize your margin with where you send them calls, that's easily achievable with the SRE. CLI surcharge, I don't know how many people are up to speed with that, but certainly in the UK that was something brought in pretty last minute, and it was something we addressed, a quite complex problem by adding the CLI surcharge protection in the SRE and exposing that as an API to our customer portal. Again, that's something you touched on earlier, actually, protecting CLIs, so making sure the CLIs that your customers are sending you are valid, whether that's ones they own, ones you want to whitelist or blacklist. That, again, is really super simple to add in the SRE. And CDRs. Previously we had so many different services in our network, whether that was a hosted VoIP like the Broadsoft, but we was actually doing it with the Ribbon Nuvia product. We were taking the CDR source from them guys. Our Teams integration, we were taking a separate CDR, and then also with the SIP trunks on our traditional SBCs. We've simplified that massively with a single source, which looks at all our customers every time they make a call. We've got a simple CDR, which we have now automated to be parsed with our billing system, and we've got almost like a real-time billing built into our portal, so customers can set thresholds, such as how much call spend they want to do per day, per week, per month. The next one, automate. That's pretty straightforward. It is so flexible in terms of the REST APIs that you can build. Any of these features that you've built on the SRE, you can expose to an API and map them to your existing OSS or your customer portal. And we've done some of that relatively quick. Something that would normally take months of development work, we've got down to days, and weeks. And accelerate. So straight away, the one thing that springs to mind is Microsoft Teams. Everyone's talking about Microsoft Teams, aren't they? But we were actually one of the first in the UK which had that automated. As a small operator, we did really well. But this was really thanks to, I think, the work we did on the SRE together. And that allowed us to fully streamline the direct routing. When a customer goes onto our portal, they could buy the Microsoft Teams service, and that was fully automated from the SRE. And that actually went down to these, you can't really see it yet, SWEs. The SWE lights we actually have, which interface with the Microsoft Teams service. But there was no configuration we needed on the SWE lights because the SRE took care of all of that. And I think the key takeaway really with the SRE is endless possibilities. Whatever you can think of, whatever you can dream of in terms of routing, how you want that to fit into your network, whether you want the SRE to integrate maybe on another API. We talked about that earlier, how you can get the SRE to query another API, to query that that logic and validate calls or whatever you can think of. It is really that flexible. And I think working with people like yourself, working with Ribbon or the big boys, unless you've got a £20 million contract with them, can be sometimes quite difficult to get their support, get them to help with the development. Netaxis are very agile. They want to work with you, and we've had that support that we've needed to allow us to grow. So that is absolutely key, I think, for us as a business, and commercially it sits really well. We can't complain at that. So yeah.
Do you want to say a couple of words on expanding your coverage?
Yeah. So this is a fancy diagram we've had done by our marketing team, and it just kind of to visually represent our network. We have mainly it's all in data centers in the UK, and we have our own 40 gig ring between our data centers where the core of the SBCs and the SRE sits. It's all geodiverse, all the databases replicate, so it's fully resilient and redundant. But what we're finding now is, and we're getting a lot of inquiries, is more doing that international piece where we wasn't really in a position to do before. So we're now working with carriers who can provide in-country breakout services. So for example, we might take USA numbers and we need to make local calls for those guys. That's sometimes been quite difficult because you need to make sure you're sending the call to the correct carrier who's providing those numbers in that country, and the SRE takes care of all that logic, rather than also building out physical data center presence in these countries. The flexibility of the SRE allows us to basically use the Azure network, create resource groups, and then build out the SRE stack and connect that back up using VPNs or if you've got an Azure connection, and extend all that logic and that technology that you've built in the UK, while maintaining the audio streams in that country. Yeah. So that's actually working really well for us as well.
Thank you, Wayne. Thanks a lot. Just maybe last slide about the fact of providing building blocks. We know that most of the times you come to us with practical use cases that you want to get mapped in your network, and we will surely keep working with on specific use cases. But at the same time, the way we see the product evolving over time is also by adding building blocks and features, even when we are not sure what the use case will be, because I can't count the times where even smaller features were used by use cases in the future which were not there at the moment where we onboarded the feature. So that's how we see the product evolving. Yeah, so if you're interested in SRE, feel free to stop me or drop me an email or a phone call, but you don't have the number here. So yeah, let's work together. Thank you.
Simplify, automate, and accelerate. With Netaxis Solutions.